Thank you. Thank you all for having me. Before I jump into the business aspect, I just wanted to give you a little bit of my background and what got me into ceramics. I was really fortunate to have my father was interested in ceramics when I was growing up, more as a hobbyist, and he and my grandfather built a kick wheel in my basement where he would play kind of on the weekends, and I got to experience that at a young age. When my parents got divorced, my father moved out, but the kick wheel stayed, and through adolescence and in high school, it became this special place for me to go kind of hide from the world and be creative, seek solace, refuge. I didn't know what I was going to do after high school. I actually was not even considering going to college until my high school ceramics teacher approached me one day and said, "Do you know you can make a career out of this?" And I had no idea. So she encouraged me to apply to college. I applied to a college on the East Coast, Alfred University, which has got a really wonderful reputation for ceramics. I was fortunate enough to get a full ride there. But after 2 years, so I would have been 19 years old, after about 2 years I became very restless in art school because the one dying question that was never really answered for me was, do you want this? Or, meaning my art or what I was making. Does this hold value to you? Would you put this in your home? And in critiques we would talk about how it made us feel, what we thought about it, but not, would you take this home? Would you pay me for this? Can I make a living at this? So I embarked on a little adventure that summer. After my sophomore year, I purchased a UPS van, and I produced about 800 pieces of pottery, and I drove across the country selling pottery and living out of my UPS van. And it was an amazing experience, very challenging, but very rewarding as well. I had never been really west of New York. I grew up in Massachusetts, and just to see the rest of the country was amazing. I actually remember vividly visiting Arches and Canyonlands as I looped through Utah here. But I decided after that trip that I didn't really want to go back to school immediately. I wanted to explore what was outside of school. And that's what sort of led me in this path that I'm on now, let's see, which is Mudshark Studios. But where I started was I met this gentleman, Jonathan Kaplan, in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. In art school, I had lacked a lot of technical skill. So I met this gentleman who was sort of a dying breed. In the 70s and the 80s, there was an unbelievable amount of ceramic manufacturing occurring in the United States, specifically on the West Coast. But like many other industries, over time, a lot of this work was subcontracted overseas, and these businesses went out of business. So Jonathan was one of maybe 5 or 6 people in the United States that knew how to make molds, plaster molds, and knew some very specific production methods for ceramics. So he became kind of a mentor for me, learning both technical as well as some of the initial business stuff. But to be honest, most of my introduction into business, really it was out of naivety. I remember working hard and long days for Jonathan with my soon-to-be business partner, Chris Lyon, who was my best friend at the time. And he and I are always looking up at the office, and Jonathan's on the computer, he's writing emails, he's answering the phone, and we're like, what does that guy do all day? You know, we're schlepping all the clay and mixing everything, getting dirty, breaking our backs. I soon understand what he did in the office. So when I moved to Portland, I lived with Chris's brother in this small house. We started Mudshark in a basement, just the two of us. And what Mudshark does is we are a private label manufacturer or a subcontractor. So anybody, a homeowner, a designer, a catalog company, any one of you could design an object, literally draw it on a napkin, and we can start a discussion on how I would make one of those or how I would make thousands of those for you. In the beginning, it was just, obviously just the two of us in the basement. We would take an object, we could, and the photos there, we could lathe turn an object, we could sculpt it out of solid plaster. Nowadays, a lot of this a lot of the technology would be 3D printing or CNCing, so we implement more technologically advanced methods now. But I'll talk about one of our first notable projects, which was for a gentleman, Jim Riswald. We had no idea who Jim was when he first emailed us, and I learned several lessons in this project. One, when you're approached by someone to do business with them, it's really important to research them. We waited until about 5 minutes before he was going to pull up to our house, and to try and visualize this, the studio's in the basement, you've got two 25-year-old guys living in the house, it's totally messy, cats, dogs. We Google him and we find out the first thing that comes up is Newsweek top 100 most influential advertisers of the 90s. And this guy's coming to our, totally messy bachelor pad of a house. We frantically clean up and prepare for him. What he had done is he ran a place, or was a higher up at Wieden & Kennedy, which is a large ad agency. He did all the Michael Jordan ads, Spike Lee, Nike ads. But he was also a gallery artist. And so just like, if you're familiar with an artist, Jeff Koons, who's more of an idea person. They don't need to know anything about the material. They have a vision. They want to create it. His vision was to create a giant Chairman Mao out of clay standing in a 3-foot-tall Chinese takeout box. And he came to us to quote this. And we said, sure, of course. The project, we had never, up until then, we had probably taken on projects that were $100 to $300 at a time. This project, the value, or we quoted this project at $1,000. It took us a month to complete. Very difficult to create a large-scale piece like this. And again, this was all just done in our basement. At the end, when he had his gallery opening, the piece sold before we even showed up to the gallery. He came up and gave me a big pat on the back, thanked me, and I looked at the price tag on the piece, and it was, I think, $48,000 that he sold the sculpture for. And he jokingly said, so when are you going to make me another one? And I said, well, we're going to have to raise our price. As silly as it sounds, the next time we did one of these, we went up to $2,000, which was still not nearly enough. One of the things we learned over the years is, in the beginning, when you're starting something, your value is really only what people are willing to pay you, right? And it's scary to go out there and say, I want more money, or I deserve more money. As we started to grow into having employees, there's sort of a different responsibility, or a different layer of responsibility that comes into play. But what projects like this did for us is it leverages marketing ability. So we were able to get into a couple different ceramic magazines using the same photos that we cropped and took in our basement, which led us to more work, more consistent work. And as we began to have more consistent work, we were able to begin to hire people. But what we learned very quickly was that we had to change our pricing. It's one thing, and I say this sort of jokingly, but in all seriousness it was true, it's one thing to be paying ourselves $5 an hour when we do these projects, but when you start paying employees $10, $12, $15 an hour, you need to at least be getting that much, so you don't go out of business really quick. And again, in the beginning, it just felt like success for us to just get another project, to not have to go work a 9-to-5 job for someone else. And that's what was the most fulfilling part. But the further in you get, eventually you need to think about your future, your company's future, your employees, your responsibility to these people. So as we expanded, we moved out of the basement. We were fortunate enough and able to purchase a small property, which is about a half an acre. It had a house and 5,000 square feet of garage, all of which was totally dilapidated. So we were able to get it for really cheap. We bordered on, like, it still is kind of considered like gangland territory. There are shootings near our house, very sort of poverty area, but it was what we could afford to begin this endeavor on a larger scale. And one of the things to note that we identified really quickly, which many of you will probably identify as well, is in the beginning when you don't have a lot of cash or capital, how are you going to rent a space for your business and rent a place for you to live? So for us it was a live-work scenario. We had to merge those two. As we grew, we really started to take on such a wide variety of projects. And mainly, and it is, I say this, it is to a fault that I say yes to everything. Whether it's thousands of a coffee mug or 4.5-foot tall urinals, anybody would bring us these all different sizes, shapes, quantities of different projects. And we would take them on. We actually still make these urinals, our 1909 reproduction. We make about 10 of them a year in our shop. And they're actually all hand-built and hand-sculpted, which is quite a bit of labor. I think we started making these probably around $1,000. And we're not Kohler. We're not set up to make toilets. So we lose a lot in the process. And one of the things we had to learn with value was, even if it takes you 4 times to yield 1 piece, you still need to bill for that time. And so now, something like this would cost the same client about $4,000 to sculpt those by hand. One of the next projects that also got us a lot of notoriety and kind of kept stepping us in this direction of becoming a larger company was a gentleman, Horatio Law, and he does public art projects. So we kind of identified a whole different sector for us. You know, initially it was us thinking that we were just helping out potters, so to speak, and artists, like designer artist types, and then identifying like with the Jim Riswold that there was gallery artists out there that were willing to pay a pretty penny for our services. Horatio, as a public artist, he would put together ideas for when a new building is built. There's a certain percentage of, depending what state you're in, a certain percentage of money that needs to be spent on art. And he would bid for these projects. This one here won a top 5 public installation award back in 2011. What we did for this project was we created 200 bowls. This was for an Asian Immigration Services building in Seattle. And part of his vibe or sort of mojo is including the community of the building in the art. So what you can't really see well in the final installation is all the artwork that all the inhabitants of the building or folks that would go to utilize the services in the building, they painted on the outside of the bowls, and then we glazed them, and then we gold lustered them and installed them. So projects like this also led to, while I would say we didn't bid the project well, it led to new opportunities. And I think as you take on partnerships and opportunities, you have to weigh that the value is not all financial. Some it's marketing, some it's connections and networking, and kind of balancing all those is an important way to think about what a project does for you and your business. It led us to a phone call that I received, I think around 2013, was Citibank, and we did these, pictured behind the 2 athletes there, Rowdy Gaines, and I'm blanking the other gentleman's name, are those gold plaques that we did in the back, and we did them for the London and Sochi Olympics. We got to, it was the first time I've ever been paid to travel, where they initially flew me to Miami, myself and an employee, where we molded the athletes' feet. And it was just really fun. Got to meet a lot of different Olympic athletes and be on set as they were filming commercials for the Olympics. This was a fun project that we did that was also very technically challenging for us to create these strawberry planters. Where it segues to, though, is that exposure thing. We picked up a Dwell magazine one day, and we actually found that we were in there 4 different times. While that sounded sounds pretty cool and amazing, our name was nowhere on anything, which is part of what we do as a private label manufacturer. We're putting someone else's branding on something. But eventually that did lead to our own notoriety. 2012 was the inaugural American Made Awards presented by Martha Stewart, or hosted by Martha Stewart, excuse me. And one of the things, so I'll back up and say, our company has never advertised. What we do by making good products, good designs, good execution on what our clients want, is they are our advertisers. They're out there wholesaling and retailing and telling the story of how their products are made. They're proud to say they're made in the United States. They're proud to say they're made in Portland. They're not from coming from overseas, they're ethically made, socially responsible, etc. So all these people, of course, they're trying to get into magazines, they're trying to get exposure, and of course they're pitching to Martha Stewart Living magazine, among other things. Well, one way or the other, Martha's team connected the dots that these literally 5 different people had written her and were trying to get articles written about their company, but the common denominator was us. And so in 2012, when they launched the American Made Awards, they selected 10 companies in the United States. We were one of them. So they brought us out to New York. There was a fun award ceremony. We got to set up, in the following years, we get to set up a small shop with our goods. And this is also right around the time when we were starting our first side company off of Mudshark. So this began, the ideation of this began when we were back in our garages before we began expansion into our larger space. And the big thing was we were really struggling to pay ourselves very well. So of course we couldn't provide adequate raises to our employees. We weren't paying them very well either. And that image that I showed of those coffee cups, there was this summer where we had an order of, I think it was 3,500. And for a ceramic artist, those aren't extremely challenging. So we were all kind of getting bored, we were all kind of getting burnt out, and Chris and I needed to figure out a way to sort of revive and excite all of us. And we said, well, why don't we all meet in our backyard after work every Wednesday, and let's come up with a design that's ours so that we can be excited when we see 100 of these come through the studio. A, because it's ours. B, because we actually make a little bit more money. We're getting a royalty on it, so to speak, or we're getting a wholesale price. So to explain, how most of that works is typically, if Mudshark is producing something like that mug, we were producing for, I think, $12 a mug. That client would then, she would wholesale those for $24 a mug, and they would be in these New York City boutiques for $48 a mug. And this sort of naive perception of our clients was that they were just raking in money, hand over fist, over all our hard work, and what were they really doing? Well, we would soon learn how much extra work it is to run a company where you're wholesaling and retailing. For those of you who are not familiar with a growler, it's basically just a vessel to fill beer with. And in Portland, there's an unbelievable microbrew beer culture. There's an unbelievable local, buy local, farm to table sort of culture. And so we felt, as we whittled down this list, we started with a list of about 50 objects that we all kind of sketched up and drew. And we whittled this down to this one object and voted down to the growler, right? Being just artists and not knowing how to promote something, typically the way an artist would promote themselves is literally with a postcard. They'd hand out postcards or mail you postcards and say, come to my show or come to my pottery sale, that sort of thing. So we did the same thing. We printed postcards with these growlers on them and sent them to all these breweries around the country. The response initially was amazing. We got, I don't even know, gosh, probably hundreds of inquiries. When we told them how expensive they were, most of them laughed at us. To wholesale a growler like this, we were wholesaling them for about $30, give or take. So that meant these needed to be retailed for about $65. All these breweries were used to getting a glass growler from overseas, mass-produced from overseas, for probably $2 or $3. So many of them that laughed at us would say, why on earth would anybody buy something like this? What we believed in was that people wanted to be more unique than just a brown bottle with someone else's logo on it. And sure enough, it did go that way. We, year to date, so we've had that company about 5 years, we've sold more growlers than we have any product that we've made for any other company as Mudshark. We've sold about, I think we're up to about 75,000 growlers that we've sold since the inception of the company. We've been recognized several times in Japan, as well as England, France, and we have clients all over the world that buy the growlers. So this company literally took on a life of its own outside of Mudshark. With the press from Martha Stewart, with the growlers growing, everything growing, we outgrew these garages. We had to expand again. So going from 6 people, tripling our company, which I don't recommend doing in the rate at which we did it, and it was really based on not knowing better, but we literally went from 8 people to 24 people, in less than 6 months, and we almost worked ourselves out of business. That year we literally lost money. My business partner and I lived off credit cards. It was very scary. And it seemed so counterintuitive to, you've got all these clients coming at you saying, make work, and you've got employees saying, I'll do more work for you, hire me. So you're just connecting these things, but the big lesson there was we weren't providing everyone with adequate amount of information. So when you go from a 6-person company where I'm working side by side with you, that information is passed directly. I see if you're making a mistake in real time. When what eventually happened is now I'm managing 30 or 40 projects at once. I'm stuck in the office. I'm not out there checking on what my employees are doing. So we made a lot of mistakes. We had to do a lot of things over and over again. But the space really grew. This was about halfway during the expansion with these folks in our glaze room. Coming into the more organization. A couple things we're really fortunate to get were a couple local grants, and something I would always encourage wherever you are, if you stay here or if you're in another city, is reaching out to local government to see what is available. So back in our basement, our first grant was through Mercy Corps Northwest, and they literally purchased our first kiln. We had to put in money as well, but I basically wrote a small business a business plan, about how we could use a kiln. And it sounds kind of pretty simple for a ceramic person. Like up until then, we literally just made molds for people, and I couldn't fire anything. I could cast pieces, but you'd have to take it back to your shop. So for us, it was getting that first kiln. When we moved in this building, at one point in our expansion, I literally went to the mayor's office pleading with people, and really there's a better way to do it than I did. I just didn't know what I was doing, but going to the mayor's office just saying, we need help. I don't know what I'm doing. I've got 20-something employees. We're not making money. We've got all this potential. We're shipping stuff all over the world. What is out there? So they gave us a manufacturing consultant, which was great. He worked with us for a year. So a lot of like the sort of nerdy stuff that I like to think about is the organization and the flow of the studio. And so, just showing off the rows of tables, where things go, visually communicating those ideas to our staff is very important to me. And we also got a small equipment grant to purchase some more machines. So this is the end of that sort of growth, a wild bunch. So other things I think about both internally in the company and outside of the company is community. Again, you have to, throughout your evolution, through business and personal, you have to evaluate. There's some form of balance, I believe, between financial and community, personal satisfaction about what you do. I have some of my friends that I know they make a lot of money, but they hate what they do. And to me that seems kind of idiotic. I would rather make less money and enjoy what I do. I don't know the exact statistic, but I think we spend most of our lives at work. So you better like the people you work for or work with, because you're going to see them most of your life. And I think that's a really important thing to really let resonate with you. So one of the things that feeds me is teaching, is doing workshops, is sharing what I've learned, not just in a presentation like this, but hands-on workshops where I'm teaching people how to make molds and empowering them in their own studio with new techniques and skills. As we continue growing, we continue to get recognized by different entities. First it was the Small Business Awards, which was after Martha Stewart, and then a couple short years after that, we were recognized by President Obama in 2015. Primarily because what we were doing was we were supporting the arts, we were supporting a local economy. So this allowed us to jump into another whole company. When we expanded into that building, so we went from, as I said, the 8 employees or so to 24 employees. We expanded into a 10,000 square foot space that had a retail space. So speaking of community, what can we do for our community? Well, the exciting thing for me was being able to showcase ceramic art, not only from a potential way to sell the art, but to educate our local community. So I give all sorts of tours, and we host a lot of events for schools, literally from elementary school right up to college level, most of which are not paid, and for me, again, that's not what it's about. It's about introducing people to clay, something that, in many ways changed my world, changed my life. We had no idea how well this community, or this space would be received, and it was really overwhelming with the support that we had from our local audience and then soon to be national audience. We soon identified as this sort of business model, there's a great sense of responsibility for how you represent your artists, how you present them to the public, and how you connect them with their audience. There was this other thing that began to occur where all different walks of life would come into our space and engage with this art. And bridging these communities is can be such a strong thing. And again, thinking to what your business does or what your product or what you do out in the world, how are we, again, creating community, overlapping communities, cross-pollinating communities, bridging these gaps. For us, again, it was building this audience that was outside of the ceramic world, introducing people like yourselves that might not be aware of what can be done with something as simple as mud, as simple as clay. We kept that property that we grew the company in, those garages, and we converted that into studio space. We now rent that to 12 different artists. So not only has that become a rental income for us, but it's also another community in which these folks can develop and hone their skills. One of the really tricky things in Portland right now is the cost of living is going up, and ultimately when that happens, it's sort of the rental spaces get really expensive and it pushes the artists out. So trying to maintain, even though it is kind of in a dilapidated garage, but maintaining a reasonably priced rental for ceramic artists so they can stay in Portland, for me, is very important to our local culture. So throughout, when Mud Shark is sort of stable, this big thing for us was, and what's been a common thread for me through all these businesses, is collaboration. So the Portland Growler Company was a collaboration with 5 employees. What we learned from that, that being our first collaboration with a large group of people, is it probably doesn't make the most sense to run a company with 7 equal partners, right? And or if we're gonna run a company with that many partners, we should probably all have some different skill sets that we bring to the table. The 7 of us that started this company, we're all ceramic artists. So all we knew how to do was just make a ceramic object, and we did that. And then we had to run a company, and well, who's going to do marketing? Who's going to do inventory management? Who's doing the books? Who's doing the website? Who's doing customer service? None of us really knew how to, or were really excited about doing any of that work. Kept Goods was a nice iteration in that we thought of, okay, what do Brett and Chris do well? We're good at the making part. We run Mud Shark Studios, right? So why don't we find someone that's more focused on just being a designer? So two friends of ours came together to make this, and this was a fun project for a few reasons. From a technical place, it was really fun to design something on a computer that was something new to Chris and I, and then translate that all the way through clay and into production. But to make something a threaded ceramic vessel that you can thread a mason jar lid to was really, again, technically exciting for us as a design. However, out in the world of products, it was not immediately well received, and we got a lot of feedback from our colleagues. It was actually really good feedback. We were wondering why people weren't really buying these up left and right like how we had such wonderful success with the growlers. And I don't have a picture of it here, but we switched the lids to wood lids, because the feedback that we had gotten from our colleagues is you've designed such a beautiful ceramic vessel that's going to sit on someone's kitchen countertop and hold their bulk food items, their coffee, their tea, their flour, their sugar, and you've got this cheap mason jar lid on it. What's up with that? But because we were so focused on the technical aspect of this thing working, we kind of overlooked the image, the brand of this object. So that was a good lesson. Now that we do the wood lids, we sell a lot more of these. They've been a lot more well received. Continuing on that collaboration is, and kind of a full circle thing that was really special for us last year was to launch Clay Street, which is a company that was founded with Chris and I and Kat and Roger. Roger Lee was our first employee nearly a decade ago. He went on to teach. He moved down to California, worked at Heath Ceramics, and then he and his wife started their own ceramics company down in LA. They've got a little storefront down there. Wildly popular, can't keep up with all the orders. To order a wholesale account or start a wholesale account with them if you're a boutique is like a 9 to 18 month waiting list. Because he's just hand throwing the pots and she's painting similar patterns to what's behind them there on the wall on pieces. So we were trying to find a way, so now these sort of collaborations became, again, we got this thing Mud Shark working for us, and we bring all this knowledge that we've gained over the last decade to the table. They bring brand, marketing, kind of all the things that, quite frankly, Chris and I are not good at. So it's a perfect partnership. And what better way to sort of start this sort of partnership than with literally our first employee ever. So we came out with this line of planters, and they've been doing really well. We've been actually a lot of accounts right now in Australia for one reason or another. And then the last collaboration is with a gal, a local potter, Sarah Wolf. She basically having a similar problem. She's an amazing potter, dinnerware specific artist, and she was having to turn away specifically restaurant orders. Because she was doing so well with all her retail, she had no interest in doing wholesale, basically. That said, Chris and I were interested in doing wholesale because it pays a lot better than just the manufacturing rate that we would be getting if we were producing the same plates for someone like her. So similar story, pooled some money together, started a line of dinnerware with her. But something that I really look up to her with, and she's about, gosh, a decade younger than both Chris and I, is balance. And the way that she's able to, she makes her studio time, she designates some marketing time, and every weekend she is out enjoying hiking, skiing, the outdoors, and doing what she also loves. And I think it's that sort of balance that we have to remind ourselves. When Chris and I were expanding Mud Shark that year, when we went from the 8 to 24 people for literally a year and a half, maybe even 2 years, we were working over 100-hour weeks, 120-hour weeks, and we were on a track to just burn ourselves out. And again, to be able to pull back from that and find balance, as much as I love ceramics and as much as it is my life, I also need to find other things that again sort of satisfy different parts of me. But the dinnerware thing has been a very fun thing, not only for an introduction to Sarah and kind of the idea of balance, but the idea of dinner and gathering around the table and what we eat off of and the conversations is a very wholesome thing to sort of promote. And so a lot of the brand for the Wolf Ceramics is that sort of familial nature of eating together, communing together. And I think that is it. There's a blank slide, I apologize. But yeah, thank you all so much for having me. I'm going to be around. I think we've got time, about 10-15 minutes, if anybody wants to ask any questions. I'd love to field any. I know that was a lot to cover in a short period of time, and I hope it was engaging. Yeah, any questions that you guys might have about either starting a business, or I certainly have made many mistakes along the way to learn from, so happy to share any of those. Dakota?
Yeah, I just have a question for you. So when you talked about like costing those jobs and how you kind of missed those,
yeah,
what were some things that like helped you be able to more accurately cost those jobs that you missed for?
So experience helps in quoting. So an analogy I think of is we're probably no different than like a contractor that was building houses, right? Except every house is totally different. So the best you can do is learn from your experiences. The way that we bill at Mud Shark is through a shop rate. And so the way we calculate that is we look at our annual overhead and that's spread out through what we call value added, which are all the employees that work to make us money, and then there's non-value added, which is me, and like my office man, jokingly, me and my office manager, people that aren't actually making physical product. We're organizing people to make product that makes us, that pays the bills, but you consider that part of your burden rate, so that's part of your annual expenses, and then coming down to a shop rate. So our shop rate's roughly $60 an hour. So it's really easy for me to kind of calculate things now, where I think it's like it's $1 a minute. So when I'm looking at an object and I'm looking at making 100 cups, I go, yeah, that's about 12 to 14 minutes. So it's a $12 to $14 object. Some of the bigger projects like that Chairman Mao type piece, the humbling nature of those is just realizing that you might have to make 4 or 5 of those. And when we were younger, it was sort of feeling like if we had to admit that outwardly, that was a failure. But as I've learned more and gained more confidence, it's not a failure at all to recognize that this is really difficult and we're really good at what we do, but we're going to fail. And we're going to learn from those failures to get to the final piece. But you're going to pay us. But that doesn't mean we're doing the failures for free. So it's sort of saying, yeah, that's going to be 4 times that because it's going to take us 4 tries. So that's another metrics that we'll use. So we kind of calculate the minutes, and then we basically do our best guess of saying how many are we going to have to make to yield however many sellable units. Did I see a question over here?
Yeah. So now it seems like you're kind of a serial entrepreneur. You've got about half a dozen businesses. So, how do you manage all of that? Like, how do you keep track of all these different things?
That's a very good question. I don't know if I have a good answer to that. It's learning to delegate things, and that can be a really challenging thing, especially when initially each of these businesses is kind of like your baby. I mean, this thing that's really near and dear to you. But you got to trust the people around you. So for Mud Shark, we were able to grow it to a point where we could afford a production manager. And through one of our grants, through one of our mentors, was a retired accountant, and she helped us a lot with figuring out some of the financials for doing this. But she had done a calculation that roughly said we needed to be at about 20 employees to pay a manager somewhere in the $20 to $30 an hour range. And we realized early on that we would never attract anybody I mean, we might, but it'd be totally lucky, and we wouldn't retain them, I should say. You may be able to get a manager for less than $20 an hour, but realistically, for someone to have that level of responsibility, you gotta pay them well enough. So when we got to that 22 employee mark, we were fortunate enough. We went through a couple managers, I won't lie. A lot of the ways we tried to promote was internally through the company, and that's the way I still look at all my companies. It's collaborations with. Initially some of them are collaborations with friends, but through the employees, by promoting within the company, I think that it can be more challenging, but it can also be more rewarding, because the people that are part of your company from earlier on, they care a lot more and they're more invested than maybe somebody that's just gonna, they know about managing, right? Or they know specifically about bookkeeping or a skill that you might be looking for. But they come in and they're not as invested, and they're not as holistically attached to the company. So anytime we can promote and teach our employees, like we've even had to take some of our employees to classes just so they can, grow with us. But so once I had the production manager at Mud Shark, that really freed me up quite a bit, and that's when I started the gallery. And then now I have a part to full-time employee at the gallery, and she handles really most of the outward-facing transactions. I deal specifically with the collectors, which is something I'm really passionate about, and specifically with the artists and curating the shows. So it gets to be my vision, so to speak, but then I have people that help me carry out that vision. The reason for the partnerships with those other companies is very strategic. What Chris and I were good at is the manufacturing, the organization, the inventory management, which we also have built up staff to help us with at Mud Shark. And then so with Clay Street, with Kat and Roger, and with Sarah Wolf, they're already good at the marketing, the sales, the branding, and each of those companies, I didn't actually delineate this, but each of those companies are a 50-50 partnership. So we each own that line equally. And they're 50%, the way they earn that is they're designing, they're marketing, and they're doing the sales. The way that we earn ours is we're doing the books, we're keeping things in stock through good inventory management practices, but keeping the lean inventory at the same time, things like that. So yeah, it's kind of just you pile, we didn't get here overnight either, and I will say that this has been 11, 12 years now. And just when you think you kind of can't do more, you take on a little bit more, and the people around you rise. And again, it's really important the people that you either partner with from a business perspective, or the employees that you bring into your business, because they, when I think of Sarah at the gallery, like she represents me. When people walk in the door, and they walk in the door because I've written them a letter telling them that they might be interested in seeing some artwork by a particular artist, or they believe in what I'm doing, and they come in the door and interact with her, it's so crucial that she exudes that same energy, for lack of a better word, to represent what we do. And now it's the same thing as our production manager has grown into fielding some customer service with Mudshark. It's that same thing that we really, that's what we put out there in the world is very important. Yes, sir.
We were wondering, what is your greatest failure that you learned from?
Gosh, there's so many. I don't know where to start. I don't know what the greatest would be because, I don't know how to say the greatest. Or yes.
The greatest lesson that you've learned from a mistake. Is that the greatest failure or the greatest lesson?
I guess that you always have to be working hard, and I think that so many people, so many colleagues of mine over the years that think that there's kind of a get-rich-quick equation. In my humble opinion, it's not there. It's through hard work and good ethics and how you treat the people around you, those sort of things that will make you really rise to the top. And I think that's the thing that we always have to sort of stay true to. I think that's probably one of my biggest lessons. But I would say that's something I've always carried with me too. It's not that I've had to learn that the hard way, so to speak.